Welcome to October. No baseball for the Cardinals this month, but still plenty to talk about as each day passes by. This is Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar here on STL Sports Central. All content brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. One day has passed of the wild card rounds, day two of those, game two of all those series taking place today. But Brenden, that's not what we're here to talk about, because I'm trying to think of a time where we have had so many managerial openings in the game of baseball. And one of the biggest stories, I would say, as of right now, is the fact that the Cardinals are not going to be making a change. I mean, we hear locally, and we hear, I think I would say almost everybody. I'm trying to think of any of us talking heads here on STL Sports Central that did not think Oli was going to return. And I can't think of anybody. I do think we all thought that was a no-brainer. He was coming back, but I do think maybe there are some that are a little surprised by it.
There are Cardinals fans who, maybe if they're not surprised by it, they maybe wanted a different outcome because they look at the performance of the team the last couple of years, missing the playoffs. 3 years in a row without the playoffs? Like, they look at the way that things have trended and they say, well, in former iterations of this organization under this ownership group, the quote was out there, said by Bill DeWitt Jr. after the firing of Mike Matheny, that 500 baseball doesn't cut it in St. Louis, is essentially what he said. And what's interesting about that is Matheny never fell below 500 at any point in his tenure with the Cardinals. And obviously, we've had a couple of seasons here more recently where that has been the case. They did win 83 games last year, bouncing back from 2023. But yeah, I think a lot of Cardinals fans look at it and say, well, why is it different? And I am happy to explain why it's different, because I am on the side of the Cardinals with this, that it is very fundamentally different, because you have to consider, again, the way that we have described the malaise of the ending to the John Mozeliak era in St. Louis, his tenure as president of baseball operations, the moves that haven't been made, the opportunities that have been left by the wayside that many fans would argue about, the deals that were made that weren't the right deals. You could go on. I just don't know that it makes a lot of sense to carry those opinions, have those positions that you hold, that yep, John Mozeliak at the end was problematic in allowing the Cardinals to continue to advance, and then turn around and say, well, the manager is the problem. I would contend, and I hope that this offseason shows it in the way that the roster turns over significantly, that I think the roster is the problem, and I think John Mozeliak made the roster. They need more talent. They need more draft and develop guys that when they show up ready to contribute in a significant way. It's not to say they've had no young players emerge. They do have a pretty young roster, but it obviously hasn't been a big enough hit rate to get the Cardinals to regular contention that they're accustomed to in St. Louis and that Cardinals fans are accustomed to. And so I really do not pin that on Oliver Marmol. What I have seen from Oli Marmol leads me to believe that under the new guidance of Chaim Bloom and this new front office, I think there's going to be a match made in heaven that's really going to help to progress the Cardinals forward in the way that Oli can be a champion for young players, can help guide guys along. I think they got to get the right pieces in place in the personnel. But that would be my thought process. It's like, I never considered that this was a possibility, that Oli Marmol's role would be on the chopping block. In fact, Joe, you thought that we might even hear of an extension for Oli Marmol yesterday. I wasn't sure that would be the case, and it didn't end up happening. Chaim Bloom told some of the writers that was not something that they've really discussed. But I do believe by the time you kind of get into spring training, it almost feels like a foregone conclusion to me, unless Chaim Bloom is doing some really quality kind of deception, some misdirection on that front, that I think that ends up being the case where he's signed to an extension. And as the Cardinals work through whatever this kind of rebuild period looks like, Oli Marmol is the manager that can guide them through that. And then you get to the point where the roster is ready. And if Oli Marmol has continued to demonstrate to Chaim Bloom, the value that he brings, I believe he could be the Cardinals manager for a long, long time.
And when you get to spring training, when you start talking about an extension possibly at spring training, so much of that is going to revolve around what kind of roster Chaim Bloom puts together for Oli Marmol to manage. I think if that's the case, if he goes out and gets trades away key players and only gets back AA, AAA players who won't be ready until 28, and he says, hey, right, Oli, you know what? Sit through it. This year, it's good times are coming, good players are coming. I think then you give them that extension. If you put together a roster that you think could make a run at fifth, sixth wild card, second or third wild card, I guess, fifth or sixth seed in the playoffs.
Right.
If that's the case, then then you give it till June in a situation like that. And that's what we kind of talked about yesterday when the big part of the press conference was the fact that they haven't talked about payroll, because it's impossible right now to know what kind of dead cap you're going to have on that payroll for next year and know what kind of money you're going to be paying guys that aren't going to be here next year. So to come up with a salary cap number it's not fair to anybody at this point.
And obviously there is no salary cap. I understand your point. Like, we would want to know what's the target number. And to the point of DeWitt Jr. yesterday, it was, well, we haven't talked about it. He's here to do a job. And, I think in the payroll thing, I think is more of a hot button issue for the public, because we can look at the tangible number and say, are they doing enough? Is ownership doing enough? I think it's more of a sliding scale relative to what moves they're able to accomplish that then will allow them to kind of get to their final number. And again, people don't want to hear it, and they don't want to hear me say, actually, the way that Bill DeWitt describes something is appropriate. But people don't like to hear that we'll give him the resources he needs to accomplish the goal. But if you listen to everything that Chaim Bloom said, he didn't say the word rebuild, but he said every other word beside it to imply that that is what we are going to see the Cardinals embark upon when it comes to long-range, long-term goals, putting the long-term above the short-term, making short-term sacrifices. It could be painful in the short-term. He said all of those things verbatim. And so I don't think it's going to be a situation where whatever transpires this offseason, the Cardinals come into the year with Oli Marmol under the hot gun and going, hey, if he doesn't do X, Y, Z with terms of record or postseason appearance or whatever, like, he's on the chopping block. I don't think that's the case. There's a leap to be made here logically that, well, how do we know that Chaim Bloom and Oli Marmol are going to fit like two peas in a pod? Because they didn't have, to my knowledge, any sort of pre-existing relationship, and it's built over the course of the last couple of years, I'm sure. And so why am I, as Brenden Schaeffer talking about this, so confident that I think Oli Marmol is just a really good fit for what Chaim Bloom's going to do? It's because it just seems the energy that I've seen from Oli Marmol in talking about, what was talking through really a very awkward season in terms of transitioning, but also kind of trying to win, but also we weren't really trying to win from a front office level. But I, as the manager of the team, really wanted to put our best foot forward. Like, I still feel like the underlying themes of a lot of that was in lockstep with what I believe is coming next with Chaim Bloom and the way that they want to approach the game, the way that they want to develop players. I think that it makes sense, even though these guys have been kind of smushed together. It's not like Oli had a say in Chaim or vice versa. He inherited the situation. I do think those two gentlemen can work in concert with one another to the point that, yeah, it's a little bit strange to say a guy that I didn't choose and I'm coming in, I'm going to give him a 2-year extension. But I also think it would be a little bit strange to not give him an extension, to say that 2026 is the final year of the deal. Then the term lame duck begins to be invoked, when realistically the Cardinals are not going to, by measure of performance on the field, have an expectation that Oli Marmol is going to elevate them into the postseason next year. It's very difficult to say, yeah, we're going to evaluate you as a manager, but we're doing everything to make your roster kind of pared down and we're not spending money on it. I just don't think it's an evaluation period for Oli when it comes to that. Now, organizations like the Orioles that truly had to rebuild, and they lose 100 games several years in a row, eventually fire the manager when they're about to get things cooking. This could be an exception, though, because A, I don't think the Cardinals are going to lose 100 games even in a rebuild that lasts several seasons. And B, something tells me that there's going to be philosophical sameness between Oli Marmol and Chaim Bloom. Like, we talk about philosophical differences, and it's one of those Mo buzzwords at this point in time. But I think in this case, you're going to see two guys that can work pretty well together. And I could always be wrong about that, but I do believe that Oli Marmol is as ingrained in this next iteration as Chaim Bloom and anybody else. I feel like it's a group that's going to work pretty well together. We'll see if that ends up being the case, Joe. But yeah, I just don't think he goes in with a lame duck season. Jerry kind of disagrees, I guess. Let him manage this year and see what he does. What are you looking for, though? Because if they lose 90 games, that's what they're expected to do. they're gonna tear this roster down.
And that's what I said. That's kind of goes back to the point that I was making. Like, are you putting together a roster, and do you think these young guys on the roster, like if you put a team together of, JJ Weatherholt, Mason Wynn, they're out there, you trade the guys you want, you have young talent that you think could make a run at what did the Reds end up with? Was it 86 wins to make the playoffs?
They did that many?
There was that many?
Maybe they
83
did. I thought
wins.
it was
83 wins to make the playoff.
Yeah.
So
Cardinals
even
fell 5 games short is all it was.
Yeah. So again, if you think, hey, we have a team that we think can win 85, 86 games, then
but they're not.
But I'm just saying, like, if you have the young guys that perform well, and that's a conversation for January, not for October 1st and all of this. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Is I don't think we know what we want to see just yet. Cards 365 brought to you by Gray Bar. If you're suffering from supply chain issues and they're disrupting your operations, have no fear. Gray Bar has you covered. Visit graybar.com to start an order today. Graybar.com and fix those supply chain issues with Gray Bar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. As you can see there on the screen, as you read in the description of this episode, when you clicked on it, one of the things that we are going to discuss has to do, and one of the things I already kind of brought up, was the massive amount of managerial openings that there are. I mean, it's damn near like an NFL type season, off season right now. I can't remember a time where we had, as of right now, 8 job openings in Major League Baseball. If the Red Sox win today, it'll be 9 job openings in Major League Baseball. That is almost a third of the teams in baseball looking for a new manager. And that's crazy because like in the NFL, you could sit there and if there are 8 job openings, you can go to college and you can look at all the hot offensive and defensive coordinators and you can pick and choose which 8 guys are going to take those spots. Baseball doesn't work like that. Outside of Skip Schumacher to the Rangers, I don't think that there is one clear-cut thing that we are expecting to happen. As of right now, here are your job openings throughout all of baseball. It is the Braves, as Brian Snitker stepped down today, the Angels, the Twins, the Rangers, the Rockies, the Giants, the Nationals, and the Orioles all have job openings right now. Like I said, if the Yankees don't make it out of the wild card round, I would be shocked if Aaron Boone isn't fired tomorrow by the Yankees. If that's the guy, heck, he might have to make it to the ALCS to not to save his job this season.
Maybe it depends how it happens, though. Like, one thing I was going to note about Oli, what if the Cardinals are like 15 games above 500? To your point, like they weren't expecting 86 wins, but they're on pace to be great, and then they collapse and don't make the playoffs. Could that happen in 2026? Yeah, I guess anything could happen. But with Aaron Boone, it feels like we've been riding this rail almost every October. And it feels like it's got to run its course eventually, right?
Yeah. So, like I said, outside of the obvious one that does seem like it would be Skip Schumacher taking over down in Texas. That's kind of what he was hired for. It seemed like a few years ago down there. The biggest news that we kind of reported, that we kind of read the report, I should say, about a month ago, and now Bob Nightingale coming back with the report today, and the news is out there. The Angels are going to interview Albert Pujols for their managerial job, and they're already paying him $1 million a year. So just tack on whatever else he would need to get that managerial opening.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like you said, I can't remember if it was Hector Gomez the first time. Hector Gomez reported.
Hector Gomez was reporting somebody else's report. I think he just translated it into English and put it out there on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, and like this is in the Latin American community where there are some nose to the grindstone baseball reporters that you may not know their names, but they're very plugged into that community. And so when something like that gets reported,
huge into the like one of it is crazy. By the way, you see like you go to like a major event and you see Carlos Baerga and you're like, hey, you were the second baseman for the Indians when I was a kid. And now
you're breaking news, huh? So that was like a month ago that came out, and I was like, Nobody is going to touch this right now, even if it's true, because you had an interim for the Angels that was probably hoping to get the gig. And so just like order of operations, that was maybe a little bit outside the bounds of like what I thought a Ken Rosenthal or a Bob Nightingale was going to report. Right. And so I kind of I clocked that. I noted that. And I said, Albert's probably the Angels' next manager if he's ready to jump in. Especially, I don't know if Albert at some point goes, I'd love to be the Cardinals manager, but Oli Marmol, Albert have a great relationship. Oli Marmol clearly staying as the Cardinals manager, and I don't think that's a one-year situation. And so if you're ready now and you're Albert Pujols, you've got that, you're already on the payroll, right? So it's a very obvious fit. Relationship with that ownership group, whether people think Artie Moreno is good, doesn't really matter because there's obviously that relationship that exists there with Albert, and they believe, I think rightfully that he could be a really good big league manager. So then for it to be reported again a couple of days ago that, it's going to happen with Albert, and now others are saying he's going to interview, it's their top candidate, it's their preferred candidate. Ken Rosenthal jumping in and saying that. So it's like, all right, it feels like this certainly is something that could happen. I feel like it's a very good chance that ends up happening, Joe, when you consider all the surrounding details of, eventually you always kind of wondered, could the Cardinals hire him? But like I don't think their job's coming open. So it makes sense if you're Albert and you're ready in your personal journey to take this step and that opening is available to you. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for Albert to go in with that organization.
I would like to know, the people watching live right now as we're sitting here and discussing it, I would like to know the instant reaction. I assume everybody watching this are Cardinal fans. I would love to know one word that you would feel if Albert Pujols took the managerial job for the Los Angeles Angels. Because again, like he and Yachty are candidates number 1 and 2. The second that Cardinal job becomes open again, whether it's a year from now, whether it's 15 years from now, and the name on that list is going to be Yachty and Albert are going to be the top 2 candidates for that job.
Are you positive? You sure about that? You're just because I'm just saying that like the guy that just took over the job that decides those things has no pre-existing relationship.
I'm talking about for the fan, like what fans. Yes, that's my thing is what fans want.
Yes, you're right about that.
If you are going through this, right, what fans would want, if that job was open tomorrow, who would fans? If we put a poll up on STL Sports Central, they would be 1 and 2 on that list.
Which we shouldn't, because that would be silly because it's not coming open. But I would say Skip Schumacher's name also would be high up on that list too, just for giggles and grins. I'm going to point that out.
He'd be probably, I'm going to say he'd be 4 on that list. I'm going to say Terry Francona gets number 3 on that list.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, let us know, how would you feel about that if Albert were to take the Angels job? Because it's kind of like a little bittersweet, probably, because you're like, I want to see him do well. Wanted to see if he could be the Cardinals manager. Cardinals managerial role is not opening up. And so you are where you are with that. Otis says he'll take Marmol for now, has experience and knows how to manage a pitching staff and bullpen. It is a massive strength of Oli Marmol, the way that he handles pitching. I know that most Cardinals fans, a lot of them may just like not get it, but there's so much more that goes into it than like looking at the box score that day, seeing which reliever gave up 3 runs and tweeting angrily, why did they bring in John King? Like, it is so much more complicated than that. And most fans, I get it, BFIB, best fans of baseball, most fans are not very knowledgeable. Just in my experience, the ones that interact with us on Twitter and on YouTube are not as knowledgeable as they ought to be about, because it wouldn't be hard. All you would have to do is look for the beat writer that explains who wasn't available that day, because it's always a conversation on Twitter and people insist that they know better. And oftentimes they do not. Oli Marmol, it is a strength of his managerial abilities, the way that he handles pitching. But this comment comes in and it's a common one. Oli is, and here's his record, and I haven't verified that, but sure, it sounds like it's probably close to correct. It's time for him to go because his record is, basically 500. That is not the way that it works. It's just not. I get it, but it shouldn't work that way because, again, to this comment, I cannot address it any more explicitly than to say, if Mozeliak was the problem, you have to change a variable. You cannot then tell me automatically that Oli is the problem. He might not be the guy. I think he is. But, like, if you change the Pobo, which we have been harping on for a number of years as the Cardinals have declined as an organization, I don't think it's fair to turn around and say, Oli is clearly not the guy because they didn't win enough games. Use your brain. Why did they maybe not win enough games? Look at the roster. Look at the redundancies over the years on the bench. The fact that they don't have, they've been looking for a right-handed hitting outfielder that can complement the rest of the players for how many years? And they go through Ryan Vilade and Jose Barrero and on and on and on, and they don't end up with the guys that they need. The roster hasn't been up to par, and so they didn't win enough games. That's my contention. And I think it's what the Cardinals believe and view Oli Marmol as well, in that same light.
And that's kind of what I would go back to. I'm going to go back to what Otis said. I'll throw that back up on the screen here too, about that. And this is where I look at Yachty and Albert both. To that case, I think there are a lot of people out there, and maybe even a lot of front office people that were looking forward to the World Baseball Classic to see how Albert and Yachty would both handle the Dominican Republic and the Puerto Rican roster at the World Baseball Classic, and just handle being a manager in those cases and how they would go about it. And that would be kind of a resume builder for both of those. So there are a lot of things that we're still, that are up in the air about their managerial style, their managerial experience, that's just not there. That really, it would just be a guess, and you'd be bringing them in as a fan favorite. And sure, I mean, a lot of times catchers turn into being managers, and good managers at that. So, that kind of gives Yachty a little bit of an edge, but still the whole day-to-day and everything else that goes with that is something that has not been seen yet, and something that we'd all love to see before throwing his name into the ring as a candidate for this.
Yeah, I hear you. It's so difficult for me to do these conversations about, the Yachty Albert thing when I just know that I think they've got the guy that they want. I don't know for sure because Mozeliak is leaving. Heimblum did not hire Oliver Marmol, but I'm gonna assume that if they're going in on a rebuild, here's another part about that. For people who thought Oli Marmol should have been let go right now, today, he's under contract for 2026. They're rebuilding. They're spending less. They're shaving payroll. Why would they pay two managers to do a rebuild? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And so, I think it's more likely that he's extended, and they kind of look at the next couple of years and say, you could extend for 2 years. You could say, hey, 26, 27, those are going to be what they are. But as long as it's kind of requisite and you don't see anything underlying that suggests that he's not capable, then you're certainly going into, maybe, and look, part of the CBA stuff could play into the timeline, but you're going into maybe 28 going, all right, like, let's start to turn this around and really develop some expectations again as ownership becomes more willing to pour into the team. And then you can start to really evaluate wins and losses. But I just don't think that they're in a point right now where they're going to be doing the wins and losses thing. But Samuel mentions, like, how long of an extension? Maybe a 1-year extension? Like, I don't really know. I think it would make sense to do multiple, because that sort of sets the expectation of, like, whatever the record is, this isn't the person that we're going to hold responsible for it, because we need to kind of set the foundation and build it up from there. I'm curious how that plays out. I really am. But it's also not, I know we spent 30 minutes talking about it today, but it's also not a huge topic in my mind, because I already kind of am at the foregone conclusion of how they're going to handle it.
All content on STL Sports Central is brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours in Missouri. Get ready. The wait's almost over. December 1st is when America's top-rated sportsbook app is coming to the Show Me State. You can sign up today, though. New Missouri customers get $300 in bonus bets when we launch on December 1st. Download now and place a $5 bet when we go live. DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports to grab $300 in bonus bets with just a $5 bet when we go live in December, on December 1st, 2 months from today. That's code STL Sports. In partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus. Physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Excludes customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. So, Brenden, I read the list of the 8 openings at the moment. Any names right now that kind of jump out at you? Hot managerial candidates in baseball? Maybe some reused names getting a second, third chance, if you will. Bruce Bochy back to San Francisco. Is that a possibility? What do you say?
I mean, I definitely think the Bochy thing is a possibility. I would have thought initially that, like, he's going to manage out his way with the Rangers and, ultimately decide that when he steps away, like Skip Schumacher was on payroll there and kind of felt like a manager in waiting. I don't know if that's official, but that would be my current guess for the Rangers. And and then, Bochy to the Giants, I think would be my current guess for that. Samuel mentioned that Ron Washington is available. Dealing with health issues is why he stepped away originally from the Angels this year. So I don't think that's probably a retrade that happens unless things take a turn for the better for him on that personal front. I think you mentioned, though, like college football, we talk about NFL, you talk about coordinators and like the way that those head coaching roles can sort of come about, the natural trajectory. I'll be very curious, and I've seen a few different reports about it. Is Tony Vitello a possibility for any of these current big league managerial openings? The head coach at Tennessee was obviously a former Mizzou guy, and they made a big mistake in letting him get away. And Tennessee has just been humming under his tutelage, and Liam Doyle, Tucker Franklin, Tanner Franklin, I think is his name. Different guys that have come into the Cardinals organization now. The two pitchers from last year, like they have it going on in Knoxville. I would be very curious if Vitello, like he really seems like he's the real deal. Oftentimes you don't see a guy just make that jump like we do in football from head coach at college to the NFL. Can they do it from college to MLB? I would love to see that because I think Vitello is a really good baseball mind. And, I just would love to see. College baseball is great, but it's not Major League Baseball. And I would love to see him at the highest stage if he is, as good of a baseball mind as it seems that he is.
Wilson just sent me this text from about 45 minutes ago. Alex Pavlovic of NBC Sports out in the Bay Area said that Buster Posey had his end of the season press conference, said he talked to Bruce Bochy a couple days ago, said the door is open for some sort of role with the Giants, but Bruce Bochy will not be part of the manager search.
Interesting.
So that is, closing the door on that, I guess.
And maybe Posey wanting to get his guy, right? Like saying, like we're going to go in a direction that he's already probably got in mind.
Yeah, the hot ones to look at are all the former players. You get a guy that's attached, that has some sort of attachment to those teams, and you kind of pick out which former player would be a good manager on those teams. And that's always the fun thing to look at. And then you get those names kind of thrown in there as well with these searches. So maybe like, you throw in like Joe Mauer to the Twins. Is he going to be the next manager there? I'm sure there's somebody in Minnesota. I'm sure there's somebody in Minnesota that's going for that.
Yeah, I don't know if the former player thing is always my first go-to, but oftentimes I think it's an easy connection to make because we've seen
it's an easy one,
those sorts of things happen. It just doesn't always mean it's the most likely outcome. But no, the most interesting one to me is Vitello if he lands somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to see some of the names that end up emerging, and probably more often than not, you'll go, who? Because it's just not. It doesn't happen every time that it's the biggest name. It's a rarity for like a guy of Albert Pujols' caliber as a player to then want to enter into the managerial space. That's not something that often happens. A lot of times it's that kind of utility guy, the guy that, kind of was told at some point, all right, the time to hang him up as a player because you're not getting offers, join an organization as a coach, work your way up, that end up turning into really good managers because even they've got experience, right? They've coached through a system. Daniel Descalso, Daniel Descalso could very much be a candidate for an opening this cycle. That wouldn't shock me. So those are the sorts of things that, I kind of am looking for and evaluating if it happens in this cycle, but, time will tell.
It sure will. One game going on at the moment, that is Guardians and Tigers. I don't know if you have the score pulled up in front of you right now. No. Last time it's 1-1 in the middle of the fifth inning. So heading into the bottom of the fifth, 1-1 there between the Guardians and the Tigers. Tigers up 1-0 in that series, and all of the other game twos happening later on today as well. So we will be back with another edition of Card Central 365 tomorrow, and all throughout the off season as news comes your way. One of the biggest things we haven't touched on, and I'm sure Randy will touch on it, the Post-Dispatch reporting that yesterday Chaim Bloom talking about Nolan Arenado's situation with the Cardinals. Brendan, you had kind of opined yesterday during the show that they would just DFA him if they couldn't find a trade partner. I guess it was said yesterday that was not an option, that they would welcome him back with open arms. That
they won't
be
release
happy to have him.
Yeah, I'd be very curious. And look, does part of that stem from, all right, if he's getting the money, there's no real, like, he's not a bad defender. He's still a very good defender. Maybe the health was the reason it's really declined at the plate, and he can be a league average bat offensively, be above average defensively, and be worth a couple of wins above replacement. Like, he could, that's a possibility for Arenado. I think it happens more likely in another ballpark than Busch Stadium, just because of the way that ballpark saps everybody's power collectively, not just Arenado. But I think that's a possibility. Does the way Gorman finished the season kind of, like, I know we talked about, well, yeah, you just plug Gorman in at third. Man, they could be in a situation with Gorman where they're just like, we're not doing this again. Like, it is what it is at this point. And, we got Weatherholt. Can we stick him at third and find a way to make that work? If you trade Donovan because you can get value, all right, do you plug Sajaci in at third? Like, could you just live with that and Gorman not be as big of a factor in these conversations? If they're willing to approach the offseason that way, and the Arenado stuff doesn't have to happen before everything else can happen, then, maybe there's a chance that it never does and he's back. I would just, the finality with which Arenado spoke, he said they're not going to release him. Totally great. I'm not saying I don't believe Chaim Bloom. I'm just saying I would be shocked still if Arenado's on the Cardinals next year, just based on everything that's been said.
We got plenty of topics. That's why we call it 365 every single day. Something to talk about with the Cardinals in one of the biggest off seasons since we can remember, with a whole new regime running things as the Chaim Bloom era is upon us. He's Brenden Schaeffer. I'm Joe Roderick. This has been Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar, here on STL Sports Central, brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours.